Hello and welcome once again to the Go Crisis podcast, where we examine the challenges which lie behind every company, every authority, organization which has to deal with a moment of unexpected, often tragic crisis. And they are the sorts of issues which threaten to change their world. As ever, I'm joined by the CEO of Go Crisis, Elmarie Marais. Elmarie, lovely to see you again after, well, a good summer break.
Hi, David. Yes, lovely. I've been traveling, so I didn't really experience the incredible weather that the UK has experienced, but it's lovely to be back and nice to see you. I'm so excited about our chat today. We've got Simon Calder speaking to us, and I am very keen to hear from him from a media perspective. But also, as we've discussed before, often the consumer, the passenger, the families are in the middle of this storm that involves information and disaster and tragedy and the media, and they are piggy in the middle. And I'd love to just explore that a little bit today.
Well, Simon is he's an extraordinary character, actually. He has a very long track record. He's an award-winning journalist and travel writer. I've known him since the 90s through the BBC, and he's been on every BBC News programme between then and now, covering pretty much every issue, particularly in the aviation field. So he's got a lot to bring to us. Simon, it's very good to see you. There is a certain irony here, isn't there, that we've started this podcast 20 minutes late because, because of a train delay. I think if I say you're in Stafford, I probably give away the train line as well, don't I? So we won't mention that. But look, it's an absolute pleasure to have you with us. I was explaining to Marie that you and I go back probably further than both of us can remember properly. Um, and I have either been with you on BBC News programmes or followed you, as everyone must have done over these many, many years. But just for the sake of our listeners, can you give us a potted history of Simon Calder, the travel writer and transport guru, I would say, in terms of media sense, because it's been quite a journey.
Well, I was lucky enough to be born just about 2 kilometres from uh, London Gatwick Airport. And so, therefore, anybody being brought up in that area is going to be working at the airport. I did a whole variety of jobs, cleaning out the offices of British Airways, cleaning out the planes of Sir Freddie Laker, which I think, David, only you and I are old enough to remember. And then I started frisking people. And I need to stress that was a job, not a hobby, at the airport. And of course, as anybody who's worked in aviation will know, as soon as you are into this extraordinary industry which does so much to bind the world together, to bring humanity closer, to create, of course, fantastic economic opportunities. As soon as you're into that, and the huge diversity of the people you meet, and the extraordinary spectrum of things that can go wrong, it is engrossing. And very sadly, I seem over the years to have kind of become the voice of travel disruption, which is not something I ever wanted to do, but it seems nobody else wants that job. So I occasionally pop up and discuss what's going on and what's likely to happen and what your rights are and so on. But I tell you what, I am so glad that since I started working in aviation, the standards of safety have just improved enormously, and now we are living at a time where, despite very tragically in the past 9 months or so, we've seen a whole series of appalling disasters. Actually, if you're flying on a UK and Irish airline, you are in the best possible hands. And as far as I'm concerned, I'm far more at risk riding my bicycle around London than I am stepping on board a plane.
Yeah, that's a fair point, actually. But I think some would say describe you more as a consumer's champion almost in terms of looking out for what rights consumers have, etc. But when it comes to crisis, and crisis is a very big, broad topic, isn't it, in a sense, because it's a crisis for an individual if your flight is cancelled. Obviously, it's a bigger crisis if there's an air traffic control failure or something, and then that grows. And then ultimately, at the sort of tragic end, that is the air crash, which, as you said, we've had a few terrible examples recently. What sort of role do you play in media terms, Simon, with those events? What is your sort of what's your goal? What is your editor looking for?
Well, look, in sort of day-to-day disruption, all I'm trying to do is make sure that people are aware of their rights. So, for example, as we speak, there are 340 people who left Montego Bay, Jamaica, I think 3 nights ago. They got over Cuban airspace, then there was some air rage going on, most regrettably, and maybe we'll be talking about the threats that poses later. The flight was diverted to Nassau in the Bahamas. Once it had landed, there was a technical fault that was identified, and so they've been stranded there. And there's worse places to be stranded, certainly, but if you've got important events going on, it's a very, very stressful experience. So I try to help people understand what's happened, why, and what they can do about it. I hope other people who are listening and watching will be able to take away advice, for example, on how, if they are involved in such an event, on what their rights are and how things should proceed. And then, yeah, large-scale disruption like the collapse of the NATS air traffic control system, which we saw in August 2023, that basically just shut down about 2,000 flights. Obviously, that you've got mass problems there, and it is simply from the moment I get that first call, generally from an airline contact saying things are kicking off, until the last people have staggered home. I'm basically just trying to kind of project what is likely to happen if you're stuck out in some remote airport, whether you're going to get your flight home anytime soon. If the airline is just saying, we can't help you, what you can then do. And then, I am so sad, obviously, as everybody is, when there is a aviation disaster. And at that point, well, the whole relationship between the aviation industry, in particular the airline affected, the media, and of course the public is changed. People are desperate for information. Of course, the people we absolutely have to keep at the heart of this are the families of people on board. But you know what it's like. At the best of times, there will be headlines in perfectly respectable newspapers which say, oh, this plane plummeted 5,000 feet. No, it didn't. It made a controlled rapid descent. And anything that raises anxiety, I think, is very, very poor on the part of the media. But also, it is inevitable that if an aircraft tragically crashes with loss of life, that there is going to be immense interest and a void very often of information, which is then filled simply by speculation and very harmful to the
This is
relatives.
exactly, yeah. This
Yeah.
is exactly the
Go
point I
on.
want to pick up, Simon. I'm delighted to hear that your career started in the aviation industry, because it means that you have seen what it's like to be on the other side of irate customers. And we've in the crisis we always say it's crises happen, but what people don't forgive is the bad handling of a crisis. And of course, the most important part of that is communication. And if we, and when I say we, I mean our clients, our airline clients, I speak for the airline. There's generally as you know, it's regulated and passengers have got rights. But I think beyond that, airlines generally, the ones that we work with, are generally in the frame of mind that they want to do the right thing. And communicating in the right way and giving the right information. But it is so difficult to do that in the time that you are so frantically managing not only a disruption, irate customers, staff that are confused, and then of course media speculation, and it is almost a little bit like whack the mole for the airlines, who in spirit wants to do the right thing, but are often sometimes their hands are tied. There's so many complicated aspects to what they need to do at that time, which is why planning and training and having everything ready beforehand is so very important. But I wanted to know from your perspective is what do the media want to see? What do irate customers want to see? Because sometimes the message that the airline has, or the company going through the crisis, is not necessarily the one they want to hear, because that can't be given at the time. So I'm trying to be a bit cryptic, but I'm hoping you get the gist of it.
Oh, sure. Look, I mean, the example that I mentioned of this TUI aircraft that was diverted to Nassau is a perfect example. So, all the ingredients about it are difficult. So you have air rage. Now, we can have a discussion about whether actually there ought to be much more of a clampdown on alcohol and aviation. That's my personal view. Nobody loves a drink on board a plane more than I do, but I can see the possible threats. But once that happens, they can't divert to the United States, because everybody would need an ESTA. So they're going to go to the nearest alternative, which is Nassau, where TUI doesn't have any presence. It's got kind of the phone number, or dare I say it, probably even the fax number of the ground handlers. And so they can say, look, we've 340 people are going to be turning up at your place. So you're going to have to process them and find them rooms and everything. And all of that is going to be really, really tricky. The fact of a part that is very difficult to source has to be flown over on a scheduled flight. And while this is happening, the power of social media is just going absolutely mad. So there's a Facebook post with a passenger who's clearly upset and stressed and angry and confused, and just wants to go home. But in a airport terminal, just saying it's all kicking off. This is a disaster. We're all terrified, and the airline has at that point lost control, even though they have a perfectly reasonable story to tell, which is just, we've been trying to do the right thing at every possible step, but we are just in this really difficult set of circumstances.
Can I jump in there, Simon?
Yeah.
I want to jump in there because I think this is really important. And you are an exception because of your longevity in the area, your expertise in the field, but there is then very clearly a temptation, isn't there, within news in particular, to side with the consumer.
Oh, completely naturally, because it's all, and you get this in any industry, I guess, but it's always, if somebody is clearly stressed, upset, not being looked after. This poor woman said, I'm staying in a hotel I wouldn't put my dogs in. And obviously we don't know that, but she is the only reporter there, as it were. And yeah, of course, the natural thing is to side with the consumer. And I'm afraid I have seen, and I absolutely take your point, Elmarie, that airlines generally want to do the right thing. But I've seen all too many examples of, particularly perhaps people taking local decisions where that doesn't happen. And the consumer is most definitely disadvantaged. So, it's a tough one. But exactly as you say, David, the default is the customer is always right.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. And sorry, David, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I would agree with that, and that is generally our advice would be to of course try and right the wrong and compensate appropriately and communicate clearly, and all of those things very, very important. But I suppose there's a point where that is limited for whatever reason, and then you sort of on the back foot fighting fires. And I suppose doing the right thing, even if it's a little bit too late, is at least something that you could do as a provider of a service, for sure.
Yeah. Simon, how would you suggest then that maybe airlines, other travel options are available, of course. how should they better deal, do you think, with the media? I note in your, you often say, I try to challenge the travel industry where
Yeah.
necessary and give praise where it's due. So you've built up, over many, many years, you've built up your connections and your sort of standing, I suppose. But what is the way to narrow the gap, if you like, between these organizations and the media? Is there a sort of, I mean, I know there's no golden rule, but what would you suggest?
Well, look, as you will know, as Marie will know, the aviation industry is absolutely full of great people, all trying to do the right thing, all trying to get those people back from Nassau or in the Bahamas. And so there is a good story to tell, which is we've been dealt this really appalling hand, and here's what we're trying to do to rescue the situation. And it wasn't until I kind of tackled the airline and put to them, look, I've got all of this these accounts from passengers, and it looks pretty grim. But they said, well, actually, here's what happened, and you can just be proactive. Tell people, even if you might be thinking, well, we don't want to draw attention to the fact that we got a plane load of people stuck in Nassau, but actually, if you can demonstrate, yeah, we're doing the absolute best that we can. Here's what we're doing. By the way, we're moving in an extra crew from Mexico, and doing all we can to get these people home. That's a good story to tell. Stuff happens. People understand that things go wrong. It's how you deal with it. And one aspect in which they have done very well indeed is they've just said, you're all due £520 in compensation. That's about $700 US, and just claim that back. And they're about the only airline I know who do that, rather than do everything they can to deflect those claims, because obviously it's extremely expensive, and they'll be certainly getting on for $500,000 worse off as a result of this air rage incident, which triggered the problem in the first place.
And Simon, so you mentioned that when you reached out to the airline, they then came back with a message. And I think we teach a lot about having those pre-incident relationships. And when I say incident, I mean when something big happens, of course. But, for airlines, disruptions is business as usual, effectively. But something like this that becomes really an issue in social media, because we are up against this incredible monster, in good and bad ways, because we can really play to in the favor. There's so many other ways we can use social media, but to our advantage. But in this case, obviously, it becomes a little bit of a wildfire. So what relationships should the airlines and the communications teams have with the media beforehand? Do they exist, or is it only when here's a bit of, here's a mole feeding you bad news, or is there also, hang on, Simon, can you fight our corner? This is what we're doing. Can you give us a fair representation of what's going on?
Great question. And look, I work with obviously airports and other providers as well as just airlines. But the good ones are being proactive. They're saying, as Gatwick Airport did the other day, come and have a look at our baggage thing. What we want to do, and this is a really good bit of proactive stuff on behalf of the customer to make their lives easier, we're going to show you all the things that go wrong with baggage. We're doing our best, but frankly, if you're going to have things, fabric tied to your case, which is then going to gum up the system, that's going to be a disaster. So don't do that. Take off all those old labels. Otherwise, your bag will be going to Lagos when you're going to Los Angeles. Lots and lots of stuff that you can do. And that's very good and proactive. And if you do those things to emphasize that your sole purpose is to get people safely and happily to their destination, then I think people will cut you more slack. And in terms of relations with journalists, yeah, of course. Look, journalists, of course, we've got customers too, our audience, and the intermediary for that is our editor, who is probably yelling at you. Look, this aircraft incident has happened. What are you doing about it? What have you found out? So there's lots and lots of pressure everywhere, particularly if stuff's popping up on social media. And indeed, that is very often, I'm afraid, the source of information is what people can see on Facebook, on Instagram, on X, whatever. That's going to be telling the story when the organisation should be doing that.
Can I ask one question, Simon? Because this always used to intrigued me when I was on air and there was an incident like this where, um, with the BBC sort of cachet, you would always have to say, we are not here to speculate. But we then line up a series of aviation experts and say, we don't want you to speculate, but what do you think might have caused it? Is it the sort of thing that, frankly, airlines and people in travel have to just say, look, it's going to happen. There's nothing we can do about it, or is there any way of sort of improving that sort of approach? I suppose, because as you say, we got to fill a void. We've got to get material on about this crash, about this incident, or whatever it is. But it's often
Yeah.
not really helpful.
Well, look. I mean, if let's take if we may, the Air India crash in Ahmedabad on the 12th of June. An absolute tragedy involving a Boeing 787 flying from there to London Gatwick. Yes, I was called by various broadcasters. Yes, I did speak to them, but all you can say with any aircraft accident, and Elmarie will know this, is there is a whole range of possibilities about what might have happened. And I can tell you some things that the investigators will be looking for, and they will range everything from human factors to technical problems to the possibility of some kind of malevolent act. But all I can do is say they'll be looking at those, but we're going to have to wait, everybody, until their report comes out. Now, that is not generally good enough, dare I say it, for editors, for the public. They want, no, tell us what happened. What do you think? What do you think happened? And there are lots of people who will tell you what they think happened. And you can go onto pilots' websites and there will be huge amounts of speculation, but that's all it is. And for an airline, they really need to get ahead with just putting as much information as they can in the public domain as early as they can. And the best example of this in utterly tragic circumstances was the German wings crash from Barcelona to Dusseldorf when the first officer decided to end it all for him and the passengers on board. Lufthansa were absolutely from the moment that happened right through to the dreadful discovery that this had been basically murder-suicide, they were absolutely open, telling people all they could. And the moment that it became clear what had happened, they were completely transparent. And so, awful situation, I would say, very well handled.
And of course, we have that situation as the airline where you are not allowed, according to ICAO Annex 13, to even speak or speculate or comment on anything that could jeopardize the investigation. And I think maybe your point about educating, like, why is it taking so long to get the answers? Why aren't you speaking to this? Why is my baggage delayed? Educating what happens behind the scenes and how the airline, their hands are tied. They can't talk about that. But once the investigative report comes out, that's then a time to address it and say, this is what we are doing, this is what we know, and all of that. But and that could take months, sometimes years. So that huge void in the meantime of information is filled with speculation that then causes so much pain to the families and confusion and anger. And I think that's a little bit finding that balance between talking to what's happened versus causing more angst and pain through the speculation. And I'm not sure how we fill that void apart from saying to our clients, well, you can't comment on this, you're not allowed. Secondly, if you do comment on this, you'll feed the conversation. So maybe just push out your standard statement. So there's this fine balance that we have to strike consistently with. We want to be transparent and communicative and give you the information that we have, but it's got to be factual, it's got to be true, and it's got to fall within the regulations. And I think often the public, they don't necessarily understand that side of things, and maybe that education is not a bad thing.
Yeah, well, I think honestly, and that's a really, really good point, Elmarie, that the public needs to understand why they are not hearing anything dare I say it, meaningful for the airline at the moment. But of course they are, and let's go back to Christmas Day 2024 and the Azerbaijan Airlines aircraft that was shot at, and very sadly, a number of people lost their lives. We were hearing nothing from the airline, basically because it is based in the Caucasus. It does not have skilled communications organization for communicating with the Western media, I think it's fair to say. And yet you're seeing on social media pictures of what people say happened. So if you've got the tail of an aircraft and it's got clearly damage from what appears to be some kind of weapon, people are going to start drawing their own conclusions from that. And it's an awful situation for an airline to be in. But I think giving as much as you possibly can is a way that you will help to reassure the wider public, and of course keeping absolutely in mind that it's the families of the victims that we need to hold centremost. If you can make it clear that you are being as open as you can, that is a good thing. And if you can't, if there's details you can't give out, then that you would need to say, look, here literally are the rules. Here's why we are not saying anything on it. And people, I think, will understand. Oh, okay, so that's what ICAO says. So yeah, I can see that and I can understand.
Yes, and I think that clear communication, in aviation we have almost like a checklist that we follow in communication, and the first thing is to, confirm that you are aware of reports, or you can say we can confirm that something has happened, and then I suppose the added information that comes through as it as it comes to light, that can take a little bit of time, but maybe that part where you say we know that you want answers, but we don't have them. And to be able to get them, we have to let the investigation take its course. And there is something called ICAO 13, and we have to support the investigation. We can't talk about that. So I think that particular explanation, in layman's terms, could really be helpful.
Yes,
You said,
and actually,
Simon, sorry, go on, Simon, then I'll jump in a second.
yeah, and actually, Marie is you are making a perfectly good point, and I've made a note that I will look at Annex 13 and I will analyse what it says, so I can at least tell people in advance, and heaven forbid that there is another tragedy, but unfortunately that is the story of aviation. Here's what airlines cannot say, and so therefore it is not reasonable to expect that. So I've got bookmarked Annex 13, accident and incident investigation.
But that's
I'll
that's
send it
really
to
good
you.
to hear. Yeah, it's good to hear, because it's a sort of, Simon, it's a sort of, I mean, it's not a sub judice thing, but the airlines can't. They're not allowed to do that. They're not allowed to put out speculation. They have to wait for the interim report, the final report, etc. So their hands are tied. But you said something right at the top, which I think is really interesting, because you made the point that the airline world, the world of air flight is better regulated, is safer now, it's more consumer friendly than ever before, and we have social media opportunity for members of the public to say what they think about it, and they're more emboldened because they get opportunities for compensation, etc. So I just wonder if has it got easier or harder, do you think, for this industry to manage its clients, its consumers, the passengers?
Oh, it's very, very difficult. Not least because you have, for example, whole side industries that have been created in the space of consumer rights. Your flight is late, and that there will be through various clever algorithms. It may well be that you get a text or an email saying, "Oh, your flight's late. They owe you hundreds and hundreds of euros or dollars or pounds. Claim here." And the fact that the consumer has generally, certainly in Europe, extremely strong rights, and the fact that airlines are not always brilliant at dealing with those rights, which, by the way, I think need completely to be rewritten, but that's another story. And yeah, airlines are firefighting, and it's a losing battle that you can only hope to kind of push back against by being as open and transparent as you can, and indeed, as Marie says, say why you can't say what everybody wants to hear from you. And of course, at the same time, be generous, meet your obligations, and hopefully go a little further to reassure people that you are absolutely that they are at the heart of what you're doing.
Yeah, I think we've seen, I mean, not only in aviation, we do all kinds of issues and crises in different industries. And it's very interesting that irrespective of what the cause of the issue is, it is once people get angry, that's what you want to diffuse fairly early on. It's that anger carries through. I mean, I have a very good friend, colleague, mentor, Mark Dombroff, and he said that anger goes so far that it sort of goes into the courts years later. And if you can just do the right thing early on to diffuse that anger, or at least, try and, bring some of, because we always say 10% of people will be extremely angry and the rest are sort of generally reasonable and understanding, and you could work with them. But it is that anger that you want to diffuse very early on. And how do you do that? Do you do that with compensation, with communication? What do you think that is?
Yeah. Well, just being straight with people. So I'll give you a perfectly good example, if I may, from last Friday. And I do honestly try, and I know that you will as well, give the greatest respect to anybody working in the front line in aviation, because they are doing a good professional job.
They get beaten up.
They are doing their best. But I see. So there I am at Gatwick Airport again, flying to Barcelona, and in a bizarre sequence of events, I check in my bag. The flight is then cancelled, but the airline doesn't tell me that it's been cancelled. And the only way I find out is by going to the to the security checkpoint where my boarding pass won't let me in. And there's another passenger there on the same flight. And just the poor guy who's staffing the security checkpoint has to say, sorry, your flight's been cancelled. That is just so awful. Anyway, that is not, I'm going to be hopefully a nice passenger. I'm going to say, right, what are we going to do now? But you can see that sort of bad play is not going to do you any favours. And then you go and see the poor frontline staff working for the ground handlers who aren't employed by the airline, that they are employed by a company which is contracted by the airline to do this. They're saying, oh yeah, we booked you on tomorrow's flight. And I'm saying, look, thank you, but actually I do know what the rights say, and I'm going to be getting to Barcelona today, thank you, but shall we talk about how we might do this? And so to have a combination of not being not being appraised of what was going on, and then being, dare I say it, misled, not by these people, but by the organisation, by the airline, that's saying, oh yeah, don't transfer them to other airlines because that will cost us money, so we just put everybody on the flight tomorrow. And that they are in a difficult position. And if the airline had managed, and I know these things are difficult, we're only talking about one flight, we're not talking about mass disruption. If they managed to communicate to everybody, this flight has been cancelled, here's what we propose for you, but of course, let's have a talk. If that doesn't work for you, we'll see what else we can do. And yeah, we understand what our obligations are. If you do that, then people are going to be, oh dear, it's annoying that it happened. Oh, and by the way, this is terrible. I did see an email that they had sent to a passenger in which they said, yeah, bad weather. So I said, well, where's the bad weather? And they said, oh, no, it's a technical fault. We made a mistake with that. As in, there would be an obligation from that flight, $50,000 in compensation for people. And if it's a technical fault, and zero if it's a weather delay. So it's very convenient for them that they mistakenly said it was bad weather. And all in all, I mean, guess how good my assessment of that particular airline is. And at that stage, obviously, I'm just kind of with all the other cancelled passengers trying to say, look, if it works for you to stay here tonight, that's fine. But if not, here's what you can do. Here's what they should be doing for you, and so on. So you don't dodge anger, but and I completely take your point that you are going to get some people really upset. There were people heading for a wedding, who were told, oh yeah, we'll book you tomorrow night. So oh dear, you'll miss the wedding. That's not good enough. That you need to. You need to be better at it. But that's I guess an airline that is low cost and is trying to keep things that way, but at considerable cost to its reputation, I would say, and indeed the emotional health of the frontline staff, who were not having a great day.
Yeah, that is actually an important point, is that if communication isn't forthcoming, it doesn't only damage your reputation, but it damages your staff's loyalty to you and how they will put themselves out to try and diffuse the situation and communicate and support the passengers. Because if they feel that they are supported in a wider way or within the process, then it becomes easier for them to do what is needed. But if they can't make decisions, if they can't put in place processes that they know exist, that's where it all comes crashing down. And I always say, if things work well in peacetime, in crisis, they will work well. If it's a little bit of a jagged chain in peacetime, then that will fail significantly when crisis hits. So if you try to get away on the cheap with things in your business day to day, it's going to show in crisis time.
Simon, could I just ask you one other point? I mean, I've heard it said many times, actually. You'll have heard it as well. The media. The media is also quite a good whipping boy for many corporations and organizations. It's the media's fault, the way we handle things. Is there still value in that? You used the word proactive earlier, but in building relations with journalists, when it comes in peacetime, as Elmarie might put it, so that when the disaster comes, you will get better treatment, or is that overstating the case? My instinct says, human nature says, if I know you and we seem to get on, I will be more sympathetic to listening to you.
Oh, very much so, and I think if I may, David, at the risk of not contradicting a great journalist, but if I might say, you won't get better treatment, you'll get fairer treatment, I think. That happens all the time. So exactly as you say, I work closely. I mean, obviously, I'm particularly interested in what is happening at British Airways, at EasyJet, at Jet2, at Virgin Atlantic, at Ryanair, because those are the airlines on which, let's say 85% don't write in of British passengers are flying on. And so therefore it's absolutely critical that to know those people. And I've been kicking around for so long that I've reported on the very first EasyJet flight 30 years ago. If and I tell you who were absolutely classy players at this, Ryanair basically just took half a dozen journalists from the UK media over to Dublin. Obviously, I had to pay my own fare and for my hotel, because that's what I do. And basically just said, right, you have got, we're going to take you around the operation, show you how it works, show you what happens when we have problems, whether it's weather or strikes or whatever. And we're going to sit you down with our two top people for 2 hours, and they will take any questions you want to ask. And then, that that is, you're fully aware then that these are good professional people trying to do the right thing, and obviously wanting to make quite a lot of money in the process. But they're very good at that, and they're also extraordinarily good at being safe. My personal measure of an airline's safety is the number of passengers flown without a fatal accident, and Ryanair is now ahead of anyone else in the world, over 2 billion passengers. So that's quite an extraordinary thing. but yet you also get, and I won't mention specific airlines, but airlines on which, particularly long haul ones, particularly foreign ones, where they carry a large number of British people. And bear in mind, I'm basically reporting to and representing the British, who are kind of, and I won't give any secrets away here, but you're kind of something happens on a Friday. You're trying to contact somebody, perhaps in the Middle East. Understandably, it's the weekend for them, but you're just the chances of getting anything in a timely fashion means that you are almost certain to be writing Airline X has been contacted for comment, which is no good to anybody, particularly Airline X.
Yeah.
That's a
And
good single illustration, actually. That's very, very good to
yeah.
hear. Yeah.
And I think about the airline X. Airline X might say, we're not going to comment on this because we don't want to give them something else to report, or like there's always so many things
Yeah.
happen in the background. So I'm loving hearing your side of it because you're the other side of, and like I said, we always sort of have the media as the enemy almost, and which it doesn't have to be. I say we, I mean, you know what I mean, but it doesn't have to be the case. The media can be an exceptional way of getting your message out, and having those relationships are really important. But Airline X might say, if we comment on that, it will definitely be published. If we don't comment on that, it may reach the cutting board, and it's a gamble.
Yeah. Well, except that I think if you have reached the stage where me or any other journalist is contacting you, we've we've invested time and effort in that. We've promised something to our editors, and therefore it's going to be reported. And you really should just get your side of the story
Yeah.
there. And it might be that your side of the story is we've made an almighty mess up here. We are so sorry. We're trying to find out what happened. We're doing our absolute best to make sure it doesn't happen again. But stuff happens, and we will recompense the passenger or whatever. So,
Yeah, exactly.
you're going to be talked about,
Yeah.
whatever happens. So,
Yeah. Yeah,
do
and
try
that
and be
gamble
proactive.
that gamble might just not be worth it, instead of saying, we always say you've got to be proactive, you've got to be at the forefront of it, you've got to be the source of information. You can't necessarily say no comment, or we're not going to talk here, and take that gamble, especially if it's, with social media, it's just not happening anymore.
I
Yeah.
think if it was easy to bridge the gap between the industry and the media, it would have been done already. But I think, Simon, what you've given us here are some really valuable insights into ways in which things can be improved. However incremental it might be, things can always be improved, and we really thank you for that.
Well, if I may just say one more thing, yeah, the media is by no means perfect, just like the aviation industry isn't perfect. And if you are an organisation where the media is saying something wrong about you, bear in mind we are living in an age where that story is going to be online forever. And so, therefore, if it is not correct, you absolutely need to contact the news organisation and say, this isn't true. Please amend it or take it down or whatever. Otherwise, you will be, when people are searching for Airline X and something happened, they will find this terrible but not true story. So, yeah, I think it's really, really good just to talk about this and to be clear that to be as open and transparent about what you can say, what you can't say, and what you're doing is the only possible course in this very, very turbulent time.
Thank you, Simon. It was
Brilliant.
fascinating speaking to you. Really appreciate your time.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you for your very wise questions and observations.
So there's Simon Calder. He has certainly been around the block, El Marie, and I think it's interesting that still his message is be transparent, be open, communicate, which I think chimes with you. And when you're looking at it from the other side of the coin, and there is this sense of distrust, it's still a really important message to get out, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. He has said nothing that is news for me, but it is hearing it again, reiterating it again. It's everything. People want to be heard. People want information. They want honesty. They want clarity. And you know, I love that he has just said that again from the media perspective. There's no magic bullet here. It is just people want to know what's going on. One thing that I for sure will note is that I may actually just say to my airlines, if Simon Calder's on your flight, for God's sake. You know, look after him. That is for sure.
I don't think he'll object to that, but he will still only treat you fairly, not better. So that's a
I,
message to remember.
that is
Anyway,
particularly good. Yeah. Well, thanks for that, David, and thanks for
yeah,
introducing Simon to us. What a great guy.
yeah. Good to see you again. Bye for now.
You too. See you.